Princess Celestine. The final day of the Festival of the Peacock was busy for Celestine. She oversaw the preparations and organized the merchants and volunteers. Between the florists, the bards, the harpists, the low priest, the other priests and priestesses, the chefs, the farmers, the ostentation of the peacocks and their handlers, the lamplighters, provision, the other viziers, the servants, her mother, the honored guests from Ikasu, and the distinguished nobles of the crusade, she had not had time to think about anything else. Her first chance to relax was after the commencement of the first round of sparring between the two major generals. She turned the logistics of the battles over to provision and sat with her parents. "You've done a spectacular job," her father complimented. "Thank you. I am so excited. This might be the first rotation that everything goes according to plan." At the same time, she ran through all the different lists in her mind to ensure she had not forgotten anything. When she was sure, she looked for Basil in the crowd. He stood with his friends, and she was happy they seemed to be enjoying the sparring. As one fight transitioned into the next, the fighters fought noble duels. From the crowd, she heard, "This is getting repetitive. Regardless of veteranese or Ikazuish nobles, all the fights are the same." Celestine blushed, embarrassed. Each participant put their best effort into each fight, and she worried she had created poor pairings between volunteer brawlers. Perhaps she would locate provision and switch her current listings to create more intrigue. After another complaint, she looked for him at the entrance to the sparring ring. "How are you finding the contests?" she asked the older vizier. "Perfect, Your Grace." "Honestly?" "Truly, my dear." "I am going to ask a friend of mine to fight. She is an amazing swordswoman. Her practice duel entertained a sizable crowd. Could you fit her into the schedule?" "Anything for you, Princess." "Thank you." She dipped her head to him. "Her name is Anates." Celestine snaked her way through the crowd over to Basil's group to request Anates' participation. To Celestine's delight, Anates agreed. "The carry fighting style really is something," Basil said, after Anates left to seek provision. "I had not realized she was a carry. I agree, though. It is impressive." Celestine feared she might have misstepped in her request. Basil sensed her apprehension and took her hand comfortingly. Her heart fluttered. She turned to face him and smiled, squeezing his hand. Celestine liked Basil, and she believed he reciprocated her feelings, but she did not want to be too forward. As her mother's firstborn daughter, she would likely be promised to one of the royals of Vetron or Devor. She still had a few rotations before her mother would finalize the decision. Still, it was irresponsible for her to fall in love. Once she had met Basil, she had known he would be important in her life. She could tell. It did not hurt that he was handsome. She adored his slender figure and amber eyes. She even liked his messy brown hair, overgrown from his travels. She wanted to enjoy the time she could with him, exploring his mind and ideas for the time he was in Trelia. He was such a rarity. He knew so much about the world, more than she could ever hope to learn. He had traveled the roads rather than being transported to other cities by a mage. By the end of the crusade, he would explore many of the realm's kingdoms. She, too, wished to explore, if for nothing else, to obtain a better perspective of her people's plights and predicaments as they lived their lives. Her desire to travel was almost as foolish as falling in love. She could not help thinking how much she should not develop feelings for Basil as she looked into his eyes and found herself doing exactly that. To her, he was comfortable, like curling up next to a bright hearth to observe its warmth. She did not want him to leave with the crusade the following day. She wanted him to stay so she could better understand him, rather than retain only a whisper of a memory left to her as to his true nature. The hint would only grow in her mind's imagination, perhaps exaggerating his character to such an extent that it became uncharacteristic. She would lament what could have been, but if she had more time, she might convince herself otherwise and save her heart the grief. When Anates' battle begun, Celestine's attention swiveled to the arena. The two opponents said something to each other that the rest of the stands could not hear. When Anates' foe attacked, his charges were reckless and vicious, despite Provision's repeated requests for civility. Anates danced around the field fluidly until she lost her sword. Celestine feared for Anates and wished to do something. The Major General was on the move, but Sir Dadalite would not intercept the fight before Anates got skewered. But then, so fast that if Celestine had blinked, she would have missed it, Anates' opponent was down. The sorcerers gasped. Celestine had not understood why, and she fruitlessly sought out the answer until she realized that Anates' opponent was now a corpse. Anates rightfully claimed self-defense, and it made Celestine feel ill. Why would anyone want to hurt Anates on purpose? Celestine had unwittingly requested her new friend to fight to the death. She was distraught over it. D4 darted through the crowd to plead on Anastase's behalf, but Celestine's mother had settled the matter mercifully before he could speak. Anastase left the arena and headed toward Celestine and Basil. All Celestine wanted to do was rush to her, hug her, and beg her for her forgiveness. But when she attempted to apologize, Anastase brushed her off, acting giddy even. Her reaction intimidated Celestine. Is she pleased to have killed someone? Celestine was familiar with Carrie traditions, but Anastase's reaction concerned her. Celestine always assumed that everyone she met acted honorably, even if they were misguided in how they carried out their intentions. Perhaps she was wrong to assume it about Anastase. Then again, maybe she was wrong to question her. Basil said, "She's had trouble with people wanting to kill her. I suspect that may have been an acquaintance of those she's dispatched." That is terrible. How awful that must be. Celestine wondered what truth Basil avoided with his careful words, but it assuaged her over Anastase's character. Reluctantly, Celestine turned to leave. Basil asked quickly, "Celestine?" "Will I see you again later?" "Of course. I will need to sit with my parents during the service, but I hope to see you during the ball tonight." "I won't miss it." "I am glad," she said before returning to the stands. Upon claiming her seat next to Queen Ametrine, Celestine dipped her head in respect. "Thank you for showing mercy." "No need for unnecessary feuds on this day," her mother said diplomatically. "We will send a letter of condolence to the Vetronese's lord's family with the body, but after that, the matter will be settled." Celestine admired her response. After Provision organized workers to clean the corpse from the field, the remaining skirmishes passed quietly. Before the last duel, Celestine excused herself to ensure the preparations were complete in the Cathedral for the Generous to host the service before the ball. Golden lamps and peach flowers adorned every pew. The floors and stained glass windows had been cleaned, and the cathedral was ready to host the massive crowd. Ethic, one of the priests, greeted her. "Hello, Princess. Is there anything I can assist you with?" "No, Ethic, thank you. I appreciate the offer, though. I was simply checking if any additional help was required." "That's sweet of you, but no," he said. "I'll use my spare time to prepare for the journey tomorrow. I volunteered my services to spread the holy word with Faith of Sithica. It'll be an honor to pay homage to our first archangel's homeland." "Best of luck on the crusade, Ethic. We will all miss you, but I know you will do marvelously." Ethic took his leave to speak with Trellia's spawn and his fellow priests. As Celestine took her designated seat next to her parents' thrones in the cathedral, she waited for the crowds to file in. She played with some of the living flower's fragile petals in her pew while she waited. When citizens arrived, she smiled and waved at them and chatted while they waited for the service to start. She knew them all from her frequent wanderings around the town. They told her how they had enjoyed the days of the festival thus far, and she graciously accepted their compliments of her efforts before asking about the well-being of their families. Basil sat next to his master in the row designated for distinguished crusade guests. For some reason, Basil leaned as far away from Master Watercress as he could. Throughout their conversations, she had received the impression that Basil was unhappy with his master, but she had not directly asked him why. She sensed his reluctance to discuss the matter and did not intend to discomfort him further. Soon the cathedral filled with citizens. Many stood between the pews and out into the road beyond the cathedral, lining the nearby streets. Windows hung open so that those standing outside could also hear the preaching. In ages past, architectural mages had designed the cathedral and nearby streets to carry the sermon from the speaker at the pulpit to the outside public. During the prayers and hymns, but especially during the sermon, Celestine found herself exchanging looks with Basil. She learned his opinions through his expressions. Occasionally, he would roll his eyes, raise a skeptical eyebrow, nod along, or frown deeply in response to direct quotes from the holy text. She noted with which items he took issue. They mainly involved the concept that the state religion was the one true faith. Basil being a skeptic pleased her. She did not agree with those who followed blindly. She could not publicly express her feelings towards various matters, however. For her mother's and the kingdom's sake, she had to maintain the composure of a princess who supported the religion wholeheartedly. She also did not want to disrespect the priests and priestesses after all the work they had put into their presentations. At the end of the service, Celestine coordinated with everyone involved with the ball and the feast. She returned to her chambers to change into her ball gown, and she enjoyed the only quiet moments she had the whole day. Then she was rushing off again. At the beginning of the ball, she greeted guests and explained the schedule to those who asked. The harpists played popular hymns such as Angels of Our Time during the reception of the ball. Few people danced, but when they did so beautifully. Anantes and Brucite took advantage of the sparse dance floor until she lost track of them. But she was most interested in Basil. He arrived flanked by his master in the traditional garb of the mages. The lords of her land kept insisting on having a dance with her. While she was flattered and enjoyed the conversation, she could not help but feel they only asked to dance to gain her favor for a future marriage proposal. 2 of Trellia's spawn also requested a dance, but she viewed their invitations as more traditional requests. Although she did not want to be rude, she kept sneaking glances at Basil. She tried to reassure him that her thoughts were with him, regardless of who she held in her arms. Without practice in the skill of deception, she failed while trying to be discreet with her glances, being called out more than once for not having her full attention on her current dancing partner. She danced with the very young and the very old. One constant remained. Every noble she danced with was firstborn of their family, destined to inherit the noble title and lands of their parents, if they had not already. The only non-nobles were Trellia's twin spawn. Basil tried numerous times to ask for a dance with her, always cut short by someone else who asked her first. After a while, it became slightly humorous. As she danced around the ballroom floor with another suitor, he desperately followed, often getting into a dancing rhythm with his fellow competitors through the pursuit. When the harpist finished the Red Maiden, he asked simultaneously with another lord. Both men looked at her with pleading expressions, and the lord she had been dancing with sighed, exasperated that his time was over. "I apologize, Lord Covalite, but I believe that Basil asked me first. Perhaps later in the evening we will share a dance," she said graciously.
"I will await the opportunity eagerly."
Basil took her hand and led her to an open space, waiting for the next song. She tingled with excitement from the touch of his hand on her waist. Being close, she could smell the scent of campfire cinders on him. "I do not recall dancer as one of the professions you listed off that your master taught you," she said while they waited. "Outside of Devorian musical troupes, there is not much of a market for it. However, I do know how." To prove his words, he struck up the appropriate steps when the harpist played the Flight of the Peacock. It was not an easy dance, and it was indigenous to Ikazu, not Vetron, so it surprised her that he knew it. "Is there anything you cannot do?" she asked, impressed. "Sorcery," he said, "and I'm not one for public speaking." She sensed his self-doubt creeping up on him again. To boost his confidence, she smiled and said, "That is good." "Why?" "It would be far too intimidating if you could do everything." The flickering yellow light of the chandeliers illuminated his amber eyes, making them shine like golden flames. "I was thinking the same about you." "How is that?" "You're going to be queen." "There is no merit granted to one's character for being born privileged." "But also you have the wit and wisdom to rival an experienced master, a relentless spirit of determination, and an extraordinary kindness that radiates everywhere you go. That is intimidating." "It is so natural to be around Basil. He brings out the best in me, and he indulges me in speaking of all matters. My usual company holds no original thoughts of their own, or refuses to discuss their honest opinions because of my position." During the most challenging part of the song, the pair focused on the dance steps that needed absolute precision to not trip over one another. Their exactness filled her with delight. He was so close. His touches on her waist, her lower back, her shoulders, her face, it did everything to draw her closer to him. A kiss on the cheek was one of the traditional gestures performed a few times throughout the song, and each time he kissed her, her blood pulsed heavily. How desperately she wanted to turn her face at the last moment. It would spark outrage for her to act so inappropriately in front of all her current suitors. Only the tradition of the dance was acceptable, and she would have to be satisfied with it. The dance slowed, and she wondered whether Basil felt as blissful as she did. Master Poppy interrupted their flow by placing a hand on Basil's shoulder. "Pardon me, Your Grace. Basil, we should talk over dinner." She urged caution in her eyes. It threw Celestine off. It was such odd timing for Master Poppy to make such a request. "Has an emergency arisen?" Celestine looked around to locate Master Watercress, but he only looked on with the same concern in his gaze as Master Poppy had. Master Nimbus, Trellia's weather mage, looked on with suspicion as well. Basil murmured agreement with a raised eyebrow. Master Poppy excused herself and quickly left the dance floor. The song was winding down, but as Basil and Celestine restarted, it was awkward. "What could Master Poppy want to discuss?" Celestine asked. "I have no idea." Basil met her gaze. "I don't know what couldn't have waited." Upon the conclusion of the song and the dance, Lord Covalite requested her company, and she acquiesced his request. She sent Basil a wistful glance before she turned to her new dancing partner. A few songs later, the dancing concluded, and her mother called the feast. Celestine took her ceremonial place between her parents and her siblings. "What did Master Poppy want?" Celestine's younger sister, Kianite, asked when they sat to sup. "She wanted to meet with Basil over dinner." "Looks like you have competition." Celestine ignored the jest as she picked at her vegetables. "Something has happened between Basil and his master that she might be sorting out. It was peculiar." "Did that thick-blood Covalite step on your feet again?" "No, he must have taken lessons. I saw you out there dancing with the lovely Eosephoraite." Celestine winked at her sister. Kianite gestured to their parents quickly before whispering, "I know they're going to lecture me later about providing heirs, but if she marries me, it would still help the kingdom. Besides, being second-born should come with the perk of disappointing one's parents. How else will you look like a model princess if I'm not there to compare you against?" "You will never be a disappointment. You have a beautiful soul, and they know that." "I was kidding," Kianite said, "but thanks." Celestine nodded to her sister. "What's wrong between Master Watercress and Basil?" Kianite probed. "Perhaps they had a misunderstanding," Celestine said. "If I had to wager, Watercress is a thick blood, and Basil wants to pursue his goals his own way." "You overuse that expression," Celestine said. Kianite crossed her arms. "That's because everyone is so afraid of something different. Everyone wants to dream of a better life, but everyone's too afraid to try something new to achieve it." "I disagree. Everyone moves at their own pace to improve their circumstances." "There won't be any large-scale effects for generations to come that way." "But they can try out new solutions and see how they work before implementing them." Her sister glared at her through the side of her eye. "Let's change the subject." "As you wish." "What are you going to do about Basil?" Kianite pointed her utensil at him. "What do you mean?" "He's leaving tomorrow." "Yes, he is." Celestine dreaded the thought. "And you can't stop looking at him." Celestine shut her eyes for a moment. "I cannot turn my back on our kingdom for my own selfish endeavors. I have a responsibility to maintain an awareness of everything that might impact our people from now until the end of my reign." But I will not prevent Basil from returning to Trelia after the completion of the crusade. If he is serious in pursuing a courtship, then I will not dissuade him," Celestine said with a shy smile. Kianite returned a much more mischievous grin. "What is your plan for Eosephoraite?" "I'll chase away suitors until all of our siblings have been married off, and then I'll marry her." Kianite played with her food absent-mindedly. "It'll be such a relief to Mother and Father that I pick anyone at that point. They won't care who it is. Of course, that's assuming we're still together by then. If not, then I'll live out my days pleasantly in my room, in my bed, contently, alone." "You assume that Basil and I will allow you to remain as a resident of the castle." "You wouldn't possibly consider abandoning your favorite sister on the streets without the protection of the castle's defensive mage." "I do not know where you received the notion that you are my favorite sister." Celestine laughed. "Of course, you could live here as long as you would like. You and Eo, if all is well between you two." "I appreciate that," Kianite said. Basil followed Master Poppy back into the dining area after their discussion. Basil furrowed his eyebrows. Celestine wished she could ask him what the matter was, but he had not sought her gaze. At the end of the feast, she excused herself from her chair and found an empty seat near Basil. "Good evening, everyone," she greeted Master Watercress and Master Poppy. Silence gripped the table. "I apologize for interrupting," she said. "Should I return at a later time?" "Of course not, Your Grace," Master Poppy said quickly. "We're pleased to be in your company." Celestine swiveled her gaze to Basil. His eyes moved over her as though he was analyzing something about her, or the table, or the food. Why is he acting so strangely? Is it in response to his conversation with Poppy? Celestine chatted about the festival with the two masters. Basil had not said anything. He studied her, or the tapestries, or the fruit trees, or the stained glass artworks. "May I borrow Basil for a moment?" she asked sometime into the conversation.
Certainly, Your Grace,
Master Watercress said. Basil, would you care to join me for a walk in the gardens? It was improper for her to leave the celebration, but she doubted anyone would take issue if she stepped out for a moment to enjoy a breath of fresh air. It would please me, Your Grace. He trained his bright amber eyes on the table while he spoke. I hope he will talk freely when he is not surrounded by the masters. It was not until they exited the castle that he stopped studying his surroundings so laboriously. What did Poppy say to you? Celestine asked when they sauntered under the nighttime sky. Even in the sparse moonlight, the gardens were beautiful. Instead of the vast range of colors, everything washed to blue hues. There were still stark variations in the tones, creating striking scenery of aqua, cobalt, and navy shades. She told me to concentrate on anything and everything, to not let myself get distracted, to not let myself feel anything. If I did not follow her instructions, I could be in danger. How strange. I wonder of what danger she speaks, Celestine said. In the pit of her stomach, she worried if Master Poppy cautioned Basil against falling for her. It would bring him nothing but heartbreak. Perhaps the mage held the best intentions for him, knowing the problematic social plight the two would face if they attempted to choose one another. Basil averted his gaze. As long as you are safe, that is what matters, correct? Celestine said to lighten the mood. It is. Celestine guided Basil to a section of the gardens where she knew they would be alone. It was difficult to find in the dark, but it held a gnarled tree with 2 rope swings attached to its lower branch. She sat on one as Basil took a seat on the other. She kicked off and swung back and forth, letting her dress drag gently on the grass beneath her. The cool evening breeze brushed against her face, and she could not have been more contented than she was right then with Basil. I love swinging. It helps me think, and I find it spiritually calming, Celestine said. In that sense, it is my preferred method of meditation. It reminds me of the tongue of a bell swaying back and forth, but instead of a chime, the vibration is within oneself. That is a sweet way to put it. He is always saying the most comforting things. He squinted around the hedge line. How can you see anything out here? We do not want to risk a fire, so we do not maintain lanterns out here. But you are right. Usually fireflies provide light, but they are scarce tonight. I presume few will venture out for that reason. They swayed together, looking to the hazy stars in their silent hideaway. I have enjoyed our time together. Celestine stopped her swing. I have as well. It's been a long time since I've been this happy. What was the last time? When I performed a dangerous surgery by myself and succeeded. But even that doesn't compare with now. How about you? I am always happy. There is so much beauty in this world, and never enough time to cherish it all. I sneak in as much appreciation while I can. Oh. I have never felt so happy being with someone, though. He perked up. I wish I could stay. I wish you could as well. But if you receive the opportunity to return, I would love to see you again. We can certainly host you in the castle, even throw in the offer of the polyalkyl blanket. Of course I'll return. I want to serve as one of your most trusted viziers. Is that a tentative yes, then? Tentatively, yes. I have no idea what the rest of the crusade will hold for me. I can imagine. If the crusade endures multiple turns of the moon, there would likely be significant injuries that will constantly require healing. I am nervous for you. I'll be all right. Impulsively, she asked. Promise you will come back to me? I promise. Basil rose from his swing and stood behind hers, pushing her into the air. Her blood rising and falling in her veins gave her the exhilaration of flying toward the sky and sinking back down to the earth. Celestine wished that the evening could have stretched on forever, feeling Basil's hands on her back, but she knew with the morning light he would be gone. Will you retire soon for your journey tomorrow? I'll stay up as long as you want to. I can always sleep another day. I do not want you to be tired during the march. She slowed herself with her shoes. It would be selfish of me to ask that of you. I want to spend as much time with you as possible. I'll be fine. He leaned onto one of her ropes. Sleep is my last concern. I cannot have that for your patients, though, she said. They deserve an alert healing mage. Fatigue hardly impacts my abilities. I constantly get woken up in the middle of the night with requests from patients, and I tend to them exactly the same. That comforted her. Do you not speak with mages regularly? He asked. Not about these topics. Mostly pleasantries. I have much to learn. When I return to you, I'll teach you anything you'd like to know. She popped out of the swing, turned to face him, and she kissed him on the cheek. I am going to hold you to it. It was beyond ceremony, and it was the most she could do without getting herself into trouble. She took his arm and navigated him through the gardens to return to the castle, but he stopped midway. He hesitated in deciding something. Resolve came to his face, and he closed the distance between them. Placing his arm around her back, he pulled her close to him in the shadows of the hedges. Certain they would not be seen, she kissed him as he kissed her. Their kisses were innocent and perfect. She put a cautious hand on his shoulder, not wanting to become too forward in exploring his body, but needing to brace herself. Our time thus far was meant to culminate in this moment. She pulled away. Write to me. Every chance I get. I'll tell you all about the different kingdoms I visit, and I'll keep you updated when I expect to return. I will await every letter eagerly. She was so emotional, she would cry if she considered his imminent departure any further. They kissed goodbye before heading into the castle's lit halls, where she switched from interlacing their fingers to conventionally interlocking arms with him. He escorted her to her room, and they said goodnight with every hope of the shared future ahead. Celestine put a hand to her heart to check that it was still intact. It sang out to her with every joyful flutter. She was still not sure how she would reconcile her duties with her yearning to be with Basil, but she would have plenty of time to discover that answer while Basil was on the crusade. As she fixed herself to return to the party, she noticed her window hanging open. She went to close the panes when an unfamiliar voice asked, Would you like to be with Basil? Who is there? The voice repeated the same question. Please leave me alone. The voice repeated the same question for the third time. I could be with Basil. She was still uncertain where the voice came from or to whom it belonged. She doubted an assassin or kidnapper would care about her heart's desires. Perhaps on this holy day, Losihe would bless her. You can be with him now, if you like, the voice said. I cannot. I have responsibilities to attend to, she said. Would you like to be with him now? She hesitated, feeling her answer yielded dramatic weight. Yes, I would, she said cautiously. Noise rustled from the tree outside her window. She leaned out to look at it. From the branches slithered a feathered violet snake. The head could not have been longer than the palm of her hand. A moment later, she realized it must have been a basilisk. Celestine had never seen one in person before. The groundskeepers diligently removed dangerous creatures from the gardens. As it slid closer to her, she was surprised how long its body was, that it could keep coming closer from the tree without falling, or ending. Butterfly basilisks, the size of doves, were supposedly smaller than the one in front of her. It had beautiful lilac eyes, little plumages laid flat along its head and spine. Is this captivating creature talking to me? That would be absurd unless it was a shapeshifter. Chances of that were incredibly remote. Its body was as thick as a mature tree trunk where it entered her window. It is not a butterfly basilisk at all. It is a raven basilisk. And if it is talking, then it is likely the archdemoness Coserai the betrayed. Her heart shifted from joyful to frightful. Alarm flashed through her. She backed away from the window, but the slithering basilisk matched her pace. Please leave me alone. What have I done to deserve your wrath? When it spoke this time, it did not bother to hide the malice from its tone. So arrogant. You think this is about you. I just need your body. Before Celestine could scream or run for the door, the raven basilisk wrapped around her, still pouring from the tree into her room. Its middle filled the entirety of the windowsill, and her mind feared how much bigger it was. The last thing she saw was the pair of beautiful eyes filled with so much suffering and hatred. The last thing she thought was how much she wished to live for her people and for Basil. Princess Celestine. Celestine's small form was thinner and shorter than Coserai was accustomed to. It would take time to get familiar with it. Her skin also didn't fit right on her. Though the color was pretty, it was darker than her customary shade. It didn't matter how awkward the new form was, though. It was hers, until she abandoned the body, she was Celestine. She marched toward the dance hall. The candles burned low in their lanterns, and the festivities were probably drawing to a close if they hadn't concluded already. Celestine, her mother beckoned once they crossed paths in the hall leading from the front entryway. The Ikazuish queen stood with the king consort. "Hello, mother," she said sharply. Ametrine recoiled, likely taken aback by Celestine's tone. "You left our guests." I should have held off taking this form so I wouldn't have had to be lectured at. She stopped herself from rolling her eyes, and she fixed her tone to resemble the princess's normal cadence. Before the queen, she conjured an illusion of the princess's sweet, smiling face, so she wouldn't have to force it. "I did, and I've decided that I will be traveling with the crusade." "No." "I want to see how our people live outside of Trelia," Celestine lied. "How will I ever better understand the day-to-day struggles they face unless I witness them firsthand? Also, I can better understand how the military works in a practical way rather than the theoretical. Chain of command, typical duties, etc. To learn what is realistic and what is not." Celestine's father chimed in. "We should let her." "I see the merit, but you have responsibilities here," the queen said. "I don't see why Canite can't learn to handle them. In case anything happens to me, it would be good for her to learn anyway." "Nothing will happen to you because you will not be placed in harm's way," Ametrine said. "I will come back as soon as we arrive in Gia," Celestine lied again. She had no intention of returning. Either way, she would go, but it would be easier if the queen agreed. That way, she wouldn't send out search parties for the princess to forcibly return her home. At least, initially. "Ethic," Celestine called to the passing young priest. "Wouldn't it be a glorious show of faith if someone of royal blood were to join the crusade?"
"What a lovely idea! It would display to the people how committed their rulers are to the spiritual well-being of their subjects."
Ametrine shot a pointed look to Ethic. He missed it.
"Who do you have in mind?"
"Me."
"We could travel together."
Celestine prevented her mother from talking. "With the protection of both Sir Dadalite and Sir Naval, I'm certain nothing could go wrong."
"There wouldn't be a defensive mage in attendance," Ametrine nearly growled. "But there would be 2 healing mages, and a transportation mage. Until Gia, there's no need for a weather mage. A whole crusade party can replace combative and defensive mages," Celestine's father said.
Celestine could feel the social pressure weighing her mother down. With 3 expectant pairs of eyes on her, Ametrine conceded. "I will have instructions for Dadalite, and how he is to oversee your protective measures." "Thank you," she said, bowing her head to all 3 adults. "Ethic, I eagerly anticipate our travels together." The next morning, Celestine left early from the castle and wandered around the soldiers' campsite until she found Basil tending to Anates. As soon as Celestine spotted him, the human body reacted. Glee pulsed through her chest.
"Holy, it's been ages since I felt this. I hope it doesn't linger much longer."
"That isn't stoneseed root," Anates told Basil after he plucked a plant from his medicinal stock. "You're right, it's Syphilum, much more effective." Anates rolled her eyes, and Celestine decided then would be the ideal time to reveal herself. After looking stern, as though he were about to lecture Anates, Basil's expression softened when he regarded Celestine. Her heart rate sped up at his smile. "Stop it." "What are you doing here?" he asked, flustered. Upon seeing Celestine, Anates' eyes widened and she backed away, leaving the 2 to talk alone. Did Anates recognize me for what I am? Perhaps I'm being paranoid. If not, I'll need to take care of her later. Basil hadn't noticed Anates' reaction. He focused on his love interest. "I explained to my mother that I need to know the plights of the people firsthand," Celestine said before she explained the remainder of her plan to him. "I'm ecstatic about your company," Basil said. "But the road has been perilous, despite the protection of the soldiers. There have been several attacks on them and the crusade itself, not to mention those within the camp." Apprehension fouled his face. "I don't know if it's a good idea for you to come. A friend of mine was attacked by a group of men. Even though they're an amazing fighter, I can't imagine." "I will be fine, Basil, I promise," she said, trying to mimic the playful sound of the princess's voice, but failing at it. "I don't want you to be in danger," he said. "I will be fine." She leaned close into him while she did, to send his heart flying. In all honesty, she would be. Only an archangel, or even less likely another archdemon, would have the ability to cause her harm. and if they did, what was a little more suffering to her? Sorrow and anguish were her currencies. If anything, she'd have to deal with Fawn Tome's prattling, which was likely, but she doubted she'd run into any further trouble. Basil blushed, embarrassed as she leaned away. I still have a few more patients to attend to. He motioned to the waiting crowd, who shot them dirty looks. Okay, but I want you to have this, she said, slipping a paracut peridot into his hand. He stared at the valuable gem she casually handed away. I hope you have enough to purchase 9 now. I can't accept this. You should. I have plenty, Celestine said before sauntering away to leave him to his work. Celestine had debated whether to gift him the gem. On one hand, working towards something diligently built character. On the other, Basil had put in a considerable amount of effort into the different jobs he had worked already, and the sooner he became closer to his new apprentice, the better. Besides, if she would be joining their close-knit group, it made sense to add 2 new additions at the same time. Celestine had never met 9, but she would use him for her purposes. But first, Basil would need to care for the lad. She tracked down Anates, who had been packing up her supplies into an oxen cart. I apologize if I scared you back there, Celestine said, matching the princess's sincerest tone. I hadn't expected to see you here. I assumed you and Basil would want some space, Anates said. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. Celestine conjured an apparition of the princess smiling to convince Anates. She almost enjoyed playing her new role. I told him the good news. I will be traveling with the crusade. It's a dangerous place for a woman, Anates said. You are a woman? Anates scoffed. I'm more beast than woman. That's what it takes. Do you have it in you? Celestine couldn't tell if this was wordplay or a sincere warning. Given her knowledge of the young warrior, it easily could have been either. Still, Celestine doubted Anates knew her identity just from looking at her. Celestine would do her damnedest to win the Carry woman over and make her question her every instinct. As I told Basil, I will be fine. I am more than I seem. Anates nodded hesitantly. We're aiming to reach Gia in a fortnight. That news surprised Celestine. It had taken the crusade more than a turn of the moons to make the journey from Vetron's capital to Ikasu's. Then again, that path had been icy through the mountains at high elevation, guided by a novice navigator. Since then, the road had sloped through well-paved rolling hills, filled with lush vegetation and warm temperatures. Still, she had told the queen she would only stay with the crusade until Gia. She had anticipated that Ametrine wouldn't expect her return for another turn of the moons. But if her expectations were a mere 20 days, then Celestine would have to get creative. If the queen sent transportation mages after her, it would be hard to explain to Basil why she was dodging her mother's servants. She shouldn't have picked someone so principled. At least, she wished Basil had chosen someone else that would have been easier to impersonate. She would deal with those problems as they arose. With Gia being as cold as Vetron, it is lucky my clothes are all enchanted, Celestine said. I'll savor the change, Anates said, to be in my element again. Personally, I prefer the climate of Coserai. Anates considered her. I've never been. The impenetrable castle is an absolute marvel, Celestine said, aware of the warning that Lady Androdite had given her daughter about avoiding the castle. If you'll excuse me, I need to muster, Anates said. Celestine narrowed her eyes as Anates departed. She would need to cease the habit if she wanted the others to believe her charade. Following Anates, she stalked her to be near the back line. It's odd to interact with those I've been watching this past turn of the moons. While Celestine waited for one of her intended targets to become available again, she observed the other players in the crusade. An additional transportation mage had joined the ranks, presumably to bring her home when the time came. A dozen more oxen cart drivers were contracted, a caravan of horse had been hired, more of the standard merchants followed, and thousands of additional bronze and gold-armored soldiers integrated into the existing lines. To prevent potential future issues, Celestine approached the Ikasuish transportation mage. Hello. Good morning, Your Grace, the mage said. Somewhere in Celestine's memories, she knew the man's name, but she didn't bother retrieving it. Can I speak with you? She asked, leading him away from the crusade. Of course. What about? I am assuming my mother sent you to transport me home once we leave Ikasu. Yes. Also, to send other spawn to the castle if they don't feel safe away from the capital in these troubled times.
After that, I'll be sending letters to the Queen to provide periodic updates regarding the Crusade's progress. Good, glad to hear. But I will not be returning to the Garden Castle, Celestine said. If anyone from the Crusade leadership asks, tell them that there has been a change of plans, and I intend to see the Crusade through to the end, to provide political solidarity with this religious crusade. Simultaneously, she cursed the man to hallucinate an alternate reality that matched with the new plan. He read a fake letter written by the Queen saying exactly that. Of course, my lady, he said. Carry on with your other duties as normal. While she was at it, Celestine cursed him against visualizing Basil's phantom wings. The subtle drain of her magic was both tiring and a relief. Yes, Your Grace. He nodded and headed back toward the other mages. With the massive line assembled, integrating the new troops, Celestine found that Brusite, Anates, and Teleost were still at the end of the line. However, there was a new line of Ikazuish privates separating them from the previous line of Veterani soldiers. Anates had been whispering to Brusite when she came to stand in the area that Basil usually had. Celestine wondered if she had warned him of her. He blushed and smiled at Anates' words. Apparently not then. I'm being paranoid. Teleost's mouth gaped. It's an honor to march with you, Princess Celestine. Celestine scanned through the body's memories to learn if she had interacted with this side friend during the preparations for the festival. She had. It is a pleasure for me as well. I thank you for all your assistance in preparing the supplies for the crusade. Teleost grew a cheesy smile, but didn't say anything further. Princess, I'm glad to see you'll be traveling with us, Brusite said warmly. The feeling is mutual. I hope all of you enjoyed your time in Trelia to its fullest. She had to reach far inside herself to conjure sappy princess phrases. I couldn't have had a better time, Brusite said, mischievously glancing at Anates. Since Celestine acquired her new human skin, she hadn't paid attention to Basil's friends. Although she couldn't smell it on either of them, she assumed that they finally ended their will-they-won't-they pursuit and just fucked already. Splendid, Celestine said. I wish I hadn't been working the entire time. What did you all get to do? Teleost asked. I instructed Brusite in hunting. Teleost looked at Anates blankly. You had the city all to yourself for 4 days, and you went back into the wilderness. I'd take the forest every day, Anates said. Besides, Sir Naval had prohibited us from going into the woods while we were on the road. Not like that prevented you, Brusite murmured. I can get away with it. Brusite, when your stealth is as good as mine, we can sneak out together, Anates said. Teleost looked nervously between Anates and Celestine. Please keep our conversations between ourselves. Anates is sometimes flexible with the rules. Celestine wouldn't tell on us, Brusite said. Of course, I would not want trouble to befall my friends. Celestine clapped her hands together over her chest. Wow, becoming friends with the princess. I'm sure climbing the social hierarchy, Teleost said. Next I'll befriend Panite and Ether. Brusite patted Teleost's head. Chances are Anates and I won't even have a private audience with the High King or the Archspawn when we pass through Coserai. Most likely, only the major generals, mages, and Celestine will. At best, I'd envision we'd see them during our presentations and then attend a reception for the nobles. Better than what the rest of us would get. Even if I wasn't in management and administration, I'd love to sleep in a proper bed for once, Teleost said. No castle is going to have enough beds for all the soldiers. Since we aren't officers, I'm guessing we'll get cut next, Brusite said. Especially given the addition of the Ikazuish forces. Basil swiftly strode to them. Celestine, are you certain that you want to do this? There's still time for you to change your mind. I am certain. Daedalite's address cut their conversation short. We'll be heading out in a moment. I want to thank everyone who's part of this effort. We must defend our people and our spawn against those who would do them harm. Word from High King Panite is that the Rhystic threat only grows. The northern armies have not yet had success in tracking them down, and unfortunately the Rhysicli have captured a spawn already. We have no insight as to the spawn's treatment. However, you all can appreciate the consequence of a spawn's violent death. So, we march forward to Gia and Coserai to join our brothers and sisters and act as the final stand against these beasts. We will end these rogues' reign and restore Fagori, as well as the entire northern border to its former glory, befitting the grandeur that Asiel's birthplace should be. The crowds cheered, and the horn sounded for the soldiers to proceed.